You're listening to the Fairness Doctrine on the Cyberstation USA Radio Network. Back to Patrick and his guest.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you. Well, the gremlins have gone away. We now have full faith and credit in our internet, our telephones, etc. So we're heading off into the airwaves. I'm Patrick O'Heffernan. Chuck Morse is on vacation. He won't be with us today, but I'll do my best to channel him. New York passed a marriage equality bill, signed by the governor, and making it the 6th state to do so. 12 states have laws outlawing marriage equality, and 6 states now have laws legalizing marriage equality, and depending on the courts, California may make it 7. Be the 7th state to allow all people to marry the spouse of their choice. Dr. Judith Reisman, our regular correspondent on all things sexual, has an opinion or two on that. Judith is with us. She's a visiting professor of law at Liberty University Law School. She's the scientific advisor to the California Protective Parents Association, a distinguished senior fellow at the Conservative Inter-American Institute, and president of the Institute for Media Education, and the author of numerous books on sex, including Sexual Sabotage and Kinsey, Crimes and Consequences. Judith, welcome back.
My goodness, you really read that whole thing. I'm so impressed. Okay, happy to be back again.
Well, you should see all the stuff I edited out.
No comment.
For a very young woman, you've accomplished a lot in your life.
Yes, very good, very good. Now I speak today to your audience as an elder person, one of the wise elders that's so often not heeded in the heat of modernity. Yeah, so I would challenge the idea that that's a marriage equality bill, and I would say that it is not by any means a marriage equality bill. It is a bill that is designed to eliminate the notion of, quote unquote, any kind of, quote, normal marriage between a man and a woman in the effort to establish a family and produce hopefully some children, if not, to struggle through. So no, and I think it's a grave error. And let's get on the roll here.
I always loved it to have you on because in addition to being 360 degrees opposite from me on many issues, not all of them though.
No, not all. Yeah.
Pardon me.
No. We better know how to laugh, Patrick, by now. We're in big trouble. So let's continue.
We are in big trouble, but we're not talking about the budget right now.
We are. We are in big trouble. Yeah.
So what is your objection to people who want to get married, getting married? Why are you defending marriage against people who want to get married?
Well, first of all, because I don't think that it's an honest statement. My research, I ended up doing a lot of research on the issue of homosexuality, and it is homo, same sex, as opposed to hetero, opposite sex. I ended up doing a lot of research on both, on heterosexuality in terms of the level of abuse that takes place there between usually men, sometimes women, and opposite sex. And then I ended up doing a lot of research on homosexuality and the abuse that takes place in that situation. And I would argue that what we're really looking at is a very serious breakdown in the stability of our society, that this is not, that what we're looking at really is an effort to reclassify people as at young ages as homosexual, when in fact the data are clear, whether the homosexual lobby today admits it or not, the data are clear that early sexual abuse is a major component of homosexuality. And in fact, that means that people who are sexually molesting boys, assuming we're talking now about homosexuality, not lesbianism in girls right this second, that people who are molesting boys need to be arrested. We're looking at thousands of boys who are dying of AIDS. I don't see anything in the homosexual pantheon of objections that is publicly demanding that any guy who has sex with a youngster, that is someone under 18, ought to be arrested, ought to be tried. And yet these kids are dying, and what we do is they relabel them and say, no, these are just gay guys, and therefore it's okay. It reminds me of the old days when they used to say, no, no, no. She says no, 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 but she really means yes, yes, yes. So we're really looking at, I think, a major effort to seduce. I really do. And it isn't just what I think. I mean, that's, the studies that I have conducted and others confirms that as a seduction activity. And besides which, anytime you get a group, a band of men together who are not either loving women or controlled by a God fear, they become bullies. And I find that that's the truth about the homosexual movement. These are serious bullies. They've been bullies from the beginning of their organized efforts, and bullies are always dangerous.
Well, I have to agree with you there that male-dominated societies have a tendency to be bullying. I think we can look at most of the traditional, quote, traditional societies, many of the Muslim around the world that broken down into clans and in which the men run everything. The women have absolutely no rights, and the men spend most of their time fighting with one another, and when they're not fighting with one another, they abuse their women. Which is to say also that I haven't seen your study, so I haven't had the opportunity to check on where you're getting your data and your numbers, but I know you're a good scientist, so I'm not going to challenge those. What I am going to say, however, is that I think that bullying and sexual abuse is actually not a gay condition, it's a human condition. And,
you heard
and the ways I wait just a minute, I didn't interrupt you, so just a minute now. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of cases, and I've had to deal with some of them myself in my travels, of women being abused, of heterosexual relationships which are based on abuse. There are thousands of girls that are trafficked around the world from Cambodia and Vietnam and Thailand, etc., for heterosexual abuse. So I'm saying that you can't blame the gay people for abuse any more than you can blame heterosexual people for abuse. Nobody should be abusing anybody, but that's not an argument for two loving people to be able to marry one another and conduct a stable relationship between one another. You may not like the fact that they love one another and they're going to conduct a stable relationship, but that's not your business. That's their business, and frankly, it's not the government's business either, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, first of all, you didn't heed what I said. My work has always been, I started my work in looking at heterosexual abuse of girls. So I'm the person who knows about that, for heaven's sake. And I drew the distinction here in which I said that when men band together and they are not, and you may disagree with this, but it happens to be my certainly life experience and also fact, that when they are not constrained by their relationships with women, and I would say when women civilize them, and when they, we're not going to get into the priest abuse here. Yeah, and when they don't have somebody that they fear above them as in a god, right? And the Muslims, justify everything that they're doing without any kind of fear. What's his name? Muhammad apparently wed the 9-year-old, and so forth. So there's no problem
and said
with
that God told them to do that too.
Exactly. So when we have bands of men, that God. But when we have bands of men who come together to forge their own interests without the constraints of women, I say that we know, whether it's in war or whether it's in this kind of, if you will, war, that what we're going to see is we're going to see really serious bullying. And I have to tell you, I have been bullied by the homosexual movement. I've been bullied by members of the homosexual group. And I've also been bullied by heterosexuals. And there is a degree of constraint among most of those that I haven't found, within the homosexual movement. And I'll tell you another thing. I'm looking at the sexual assault of children as reported to law enforcement, the NIBRS, Department of Justice Research. When I see data here, right in front of my eyes, and I sent it to you, and I'll send a copy to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, when I see the data right in front of my eyes, about 64% of forcible sodomy victims are boys under 12, then I say, where is this homosexual movement if they are so full of love? They have to be out there protecting these boys, don't they? I don't see that happening. And I'll have to tell you, as far as the girl abuse situation is concerned, I'm on the front lines of that all the time. I write on trafficking. But what I want to see is the same kind of standard applied by homosexual males to the trafficking and the sexual abuse of boys that we try to apply to heterosexual males, and we have to work at that in the sexual abuse of girls. So I don't see the love issue. I did a study of the language in the Queen's vernacular. I studied the bibliographical research conducted by the homosexual movement themselves, members, researchers. I'm looking at their data. I'm not looking at the data that comes to me from I'm looking at their own data, and their own data confirms this massive number of sexual partners. Their own data confirms children as viable sexual objects.
We have to take a break.
Sorry.
We'll pick this up. No, don't be sorry. That's okay. I'm sorry I had to interrupt you, but unfortunately, commercialism calls. So we will be back with Dr. Judith Reisman, Dr. Sex, in a few minutes. Actually, in 2 minutes.
You're listening to the Fairness Doctrine on the Cyberstation USA Radio Network. Back to Patrick and Judith.
Rich, and I see we got the Grateful Dead today.
I love the Grateful Dead. I followed them for like 3 months up and down the East Coast.
You were a Deadhead?
Yes, I was.
Oh, my goodness. Complete with tie-dye, huh?
Yes, I make my own tie-dyes.
Oh, my goodness. All right, well, we're talking with our own Dr. Sex, Dr. Judith Reisman. We're talking about gay marriage, and I understand the data. In fact, I saw a recent study by the Canadian government that showed that violence is twice as common among homosexual couples as among heterosexual couples. And I also saw data from NCADV that said 1.3 million women are abused per year in heterosexual marriages. So I'd say abuse is a human problem, not a gay problem, and it also has nothing to do with people getting married. People getting married want to have long-term, loving, stable relationships. Some of them don't. Some of the gay people don't. Some straight people don't. Half of all straight marriages, of course, are dissolved. We don't have data yet on gay marriage because it hasn't been around long enough. But I see no reason to cite these, to use these statistics as saying that two gay people who love one another can't have a long-term, stable relationship. My brother-in-law has been in one for 27 years, and frankly, his long-term, stable marriage, a relationship, has not had any negative impact on my marriage to his sister. So and he's only one of many people I know in long-term, very long-term, stable gay relationships. So I see no relationship to your data. It just doesn't compute.
May I interject for a second, Patrick and Judith?
Sure.
I happen to be a victim of sexual abuse at the hands of my own father when I was younger. So I'm going with Patrick on this one, Judith, that it's a human issue, and it wasn't really definitely didn't feel like love when my father was sodomizing me. It felt more like a issue of power, like most rapes are. And I've never been, I don't agree with homosexuality, but I've never been offended by homosexuality. And I think it's more of a bond of emotions. They love, like Patrick was saying earlier, they love each other. I mean, I love my dog, but I'm not going to marry my dog because there is no physical connection there either. So I want to go with Patrick on this one, although I understand where your study comes in. But as a victim of sexual abuse myself, it's more of a power thing rather than a lovey-dovey type of thing.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm very sorry for that experience that you have. But
again, you don't have to be sorry.
No, I am. I mean, I just am. That's part of what I do, is I work with children who have been victimized, whether it's opposite sex victimization, heterosexual, or whether it's homosexual. And I work with these folks, and that's been my history, my entire life professionally after leaving Captain Kangaroo, became that kind of work. And so yeah, but I would argue that what I'm very happy to hear when there are two people who have been together, and by the way, they weren't married apparently, but they loved each other and they stayed together, your brother-in-law, that's really great. I'm always happy to hear that. It doesn't change my argument. My argument is that, and I haven't talked to your brother-in-law, but that we're really looking at an origin that is grounded in early sexual abuse for the most part. I would like to see that addressed. I don't want to cover that up with what appears to me to be a smokescreen and to say this is just normal. It isn't just normal. Let's understand the early premature events that took place that caused this to happen, because so many of these relationships, and we know, you're talking about many, many multiple partners, as bad as heterosexuality may be right now. And by the way, I blame that a lot on the massive pornography campaigns that have been taking place. But as bad as that is, we're still not looking at, guys who are able to get, for the most part, 40, 50, 60 females to copulate with. So we're talking about multiple partner activities. We're talking about an increase in sexual diseases, that therefore, AIDS being one, that therefore the American public has to deal with and pay for. But less than that kind of economic sort of view is my view, which is, I think, the most compassionate, the most relevant, and that is, let us find out why somebody is experiencing this abuse. Let's check into that, and let's try to help people get through it so that they can become stable, and so that they can engage in relationships that will be in the long term significantly more rewarding for them in terms of, we have no reason to suspect, by the way, that we're really looking at a genetic predisposition. So if we're not looking at genes, despite what the current claim is,
Judith.
Oh, here you're going to say we're naturally born. No.
No, what I'm going to say is I've read many of the studies on that, and they are inconclusive. There are studies that show that it is genetically passed on, and there are studies that show that it isn't, and the consensus scientific opinion is we can't tell right now, that there's evidence for both.
I'm familiar with all of them. I think pretty much, even the one about the tears, so that I would say, the point being, if we cannot quote unquote tell, I want to know what percentage of these homosexual individuals, males and females tend to be much more incestuously abused. Males tend to be much more abused Look, I did the research from The Advocate. The Advocate itself identifies 21%.
For our listeners, the Advocate's a gay newspaper.
Well, it's not just a newspaper. It's the highest-end journal, and it was the premier journal, and it's the most respected journal in the world of homosexuality. And I did the analysis of The Advocate, and in the study of The Advocate, their self-report was 21% of their high-end affluent white males, largely white male population, had been sexually abused under the age of 15 by an adult male. Now that is a huge number of abuse victims.
Judith,
why are we concluding?
Let me stop you for a second,
Sorry.
Because I'm afraid your point may be getting lost. Are you making the point that your research shows that all gay people are gay because they were sexually abused as children?
We can't say that. What we can say is that
that's what it sounded like to me, too.
I'm saying a significant proportion of self-admitted early sexual abuse in the advocate itself identifies well over the abuse level that we even have for females, by the way.
Are you saying that sexual abuse in childhood causes homosexuality? Because that's what it sounds like you're arguing.
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm saying that to a great extent it does.
I agree.
We don't know to what extent, but we certainly know to a great extent it does. Why wouldn't it? If we're saying early sexual abuse of girls, causes them to be dysfunctional in a whole variety of ways, to fear the opposite sex and so forth, then why is it that we would assume that early sexual abuse of boys does not trigger all sorts of dysfunctional conduct in their lives?
Judith,
of course it will.
I guess I can agree. What I would rather say, and maybe you can agree with it on these terms, is that sexual abuse on boys ruins our sexual identity. We have to go out and find our sexual identity, especially if we're abused by the same sex, another guy.
But it doesn't cause...
But it doesn't, because I'm not a homosexual today. Yeah. I'm not interested in men. I love women. I love all kinds of women. So I think it's fair to say that it'll take our sexual identity, especially if it happens while we are morphing into men. It will take our sexual identity and confuse us a little bit, but with the proper guidance and help, therapy that is, we can find our sexual identity. It's not the cause of it.
You just answered that question, Rich. You said with the proper help and therapy, but let's step back a minute. No, if every male who was sexually abused as a boy became homosexual, then we would have a massive homosexual population.
Correct.
Yeah,
correct.
We have lots of guys who have been, I've interviewed them. We've had lots of guys who were sexually molested as boys by adult men, and that is telling us something. And not all of them by any means became homosexual.
Okay.
But if we have but what percentage of the boys who are sexually abused as boys by men or even by older juveniles, really get a damaged sense of their, oh dear. It's been dandy.
We're out of time, and I'm afraid that's it for hour one. Don't go away. We're going to be back for news and your comments after this break. And we're going to take a look at what happened in the world and the nation this week. And I want to thank you, Judith Reisman, for being with us.
Delighted to be with you guys. Always ready to add something different.
Well, you do it. And where can people follow your work, Judith?
Oh, drjudithreisman.com on the web. drjudithreisman.com. Please do, and get the books, and then check it out yourself.
Okay, all right. Well, that's it for hour one. Don't go away. We'll be back after the news.